Her parents sold her like a commodity the moment the doctor called her barren. She was only 23, her dreams shattered before they began, yet in the city's shadows, a man feared by everyone, their whispers calling him ruthless, cold, untouchable, would see something in her no one else could. Something worth holding on to. Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for being here. Before we jump in, drop a quick hello in the comments and tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing where everyone's joining from. Elena Moretti's suitcase felt heavier than her own body as she stepped off the train. The late afternoon sun painted the streets of New York with a tired amber, but it couldn't warm the chill running through her bones. Her parents had smiled that morning, their hands clammy but firm as they pressed the papers into her shaking grasp, the papers that made her nothing more than property in their eyes. They didn't even look at her when she left. Not once. She had never felt so small, so replaceable. The carriage awaited at the station, sleek and black, tinted windows like walls meant to shut out the world. A chauffeur in a stiff suit opened the door, wordless, and Elena climbed in, each step echoing her dread. She had no choice, no voice, no one to stand in her defense. Her parents' whispers of burden and failure still rang in her ears. The drive to the DeLuca estate was silent except for the hum of the engine and her own anxious breathing. Skyscrapers gave way to sprawling mansions and private gates, and Elena realized that the world she had been thrust into was one of power, of fear, of rules she didn't understand. She had always been careful, obedient, quiet. Traits that once were meant to protect her now made her invisible. Invisible until she reached the DeLuca mansion. It was larger than anything she had ever imagined. White marble, sweeping staircases, velvet drapes, and chandeliers that threw fractured light across polished floors. She paused at the threshold, a flutter of fear rising in her chest. A man was waiting for her. Tall, white, hair like winter sunlight. His face handsome, but carved in a way that warned you not to touch. A man whose name alone could silence a room, Vittorio DeLuca. He studied her without moving, like a predator sizing up prey, though Elena quickly sensed that he was assessing her for something more subtle. Not fear, not threat, utility. That cold, calculating gaze could have frozen a mountain stream. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. "Miss Moretti," he said finally, his voice smooth but carrying weight. "I understand this arrangement was unexpected." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's all I know." He nodded, his eyes narrowing as if noting something hidden beneath her fear. "You will live here. The house is mine, the children are mine, and I expect order. I do not need complications." Elena bowed her head, the words biting in their finality. She was not meant to be loved, only to fit, to obey, to exist in a place where value was measured in usefulness. And yet, she noticed something she hadn't anticipated, for small eyes watching her from the shadows of the hall. The eldest boy, no more than 12, leaned against the staircase railing, his arms crossed, his expression guarded, almost defiant. The twins lingered just behind him, silent, clutching each other as if they could ward off danger through proximity alone. And the youngest, a girl of perhaps 5, peeked from behind a curtain, eyes wide and brimming with tears that she refused to shed. Elena's chest ached in a way she hadn't expected. The children had lost something too, something no one could replace. And as much as she feared this man who commanded everything around him, she felt a flicker of something dangerous inside her, a hope she hadn't been allowed to nurture. "You may start by meeting them," Vittorio said. "I suggest patience." Patience. She had been patient all her life. Obedient, quiet, invisible. But this was different. These children weren't judging her for her failures. They were silently asking her to understand them, to hold them, to care. The first meeting was tense. The eldest, Marco, didn't speak. He just studied her, as if he could detect the lies of her past. The twins, Luca and Leo, refused to meet her eyes. And little Sophia clung to the hem of Elena's dress, trembling, uncertain. Elena knelt, lowering herself to their level. I don't know if I could be what you need right away," she said softly. But I want to try. It was the smallest of gestures, yet Marco's eyes softened fractionally. Luca and Leo's shoulders eased just a touch. And Sophia, sensing warmth for the first time in years, reached out and touched Elena's hand. That small connection was enough to send a ripple through Elena's heart, a whisper that she might not be completely useless here. Vittorio watched silently from the doorway, his expression unreadable. She caught the barest flicker of surprise in his eyes. A barren woman, sold into his home, had done what no one else had been able to. She had drawn the children toward her. Dinner that night was awkward. The children sat stiffly, and Elena fumbled with the silverware, every clink of knife on plate sounding like an accusation. Vittorio was quiet but observant, speaking only to correct or wrong or instruct. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence alone reminded everyone of who controlled the house. After the children went to bed, Elena remained in the dining hall, the grand chandelier casting a golden haze over the polished floor. Vittorio approached, hands behind his back. "You are different from what I expected," he said. "The children, you handle them with patience, compassion. That's unusual for someone in your position." Elena met his gaze, her courage gathering. "I may not be able to give you what you want," she said, "but I can give them something. Love, attention, stability." He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Perhaps we will see." As she retreated to her room, Elena allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She had survived the train ride, the mansion the first night. More than that, she had survived the children's judgment and had begun to carve a place in this cold, gilded prison. Later, lying awake in the immense room that was hers but felt alien, Elena pressed her palm against the cool sheets, thinking of her parents. Had they imagined she would break? That she would disappear into the city, a ghost with no voice? They had sold her, yes, but they could not sell her courage, her heart, her will. And as sleep began to take her, a thought whispered in the back of her mind. Perhaps being barren was the very thing that had led her here, to this house, to these children, and to a man who might eventually see her as more than property. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent and demanding. Inside, a small flame had been lit, a fragile hope that in this house of marble and steel, Elena Moretti might finally be seen. And as the shadows lengthened over the De Luca estate, even Vittorio De Luca could not deny the change she was beginning to inspire. But the world outside had a long memory, and whispers always traveled faster than truth. Would she survive the next storm? And could she claim a family that was never hers to begin with? Only time would tell. The morning sun filtered through heavy velvet curtains, painting the De Luca mansion in muted gold. Elena rose early, as she always did, the echoes of the house's silence stretching around her like a warning. She moved quietly, knowing the children would be awake soon, if they were awake at all. The eldest, Marco, had begun sneaking into the kitchen before breakfast, and she suspected he was trying to assert some control over the household in her absence. The smell of freshly baked bread drew her toward the kitchen, where she found Luca and Leo already seated at the table, staring at her with wide, cautious eyes. Breakfast had become her first challenge of the day, feeding 4 children who had been raised with mistrust and grief. They did not speak unless spoken to, did not eat unless they trusted the food was safe, and certainly did not laugh without permission. "Elena," Luca murmured, his small hand hovering over a slice of toast. "Did you make this?" "Yes," she replied gently, sliding the plate closer to him. "I made it this morning. You could try it if you like." Leo watched her with an intensity that made her heart ache. They were mirror images in appearance, but starkly different in personality. Luca was hesitant, fearful of the world. Leo was defiant, always testing boundaries. Their mother's absence had left a silence in the house that screamed louder than any shout could. By the time Marco entered, Elena had learned to prepare for the delicate dance of conversation with him. He was older, angrier, a boy who had learned to protect himself in a world that had offered him little comfort. And yet, even he could not resist the small acts of care she extended. A gentle word, a soft smile, a plate of warm food. These things were small rebellions against the cold environment he had been forced to survive. "Good morning, Miss Moretti," Marco said formally, as though speaking to a teacher rather than a stepmother he had not chosen. "Good morning, Marco," she replied. "Sleep well?" He shrugged, trying to hide a yawn. "I guess." The smallest one, Sophia, soon appeared, a wisp of a girl with tear-streaked cheeks and a soft voice that trembled when she spoke. "Good morning," she whispered, inching toward Elena, her little fingers curling around the edge of Elena's apron. Elena knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Good morning, Sophia. Did you sleep well?" Sophia nodded slowly, then whispered, I missed you." Elena's heart clenched. "I missed you too." Even Vittorio noticed these subtle shifts. He lingered in the study, paper in hand, pretending to work, yet listening to the laughter, the hesitant chatter, the tiny signs of life he hadn't dared hope for in years. He had chosen a barren woman, believing her harmless, unthreatening. But Elena's warmth was slowly breaking through the walls he had built around himself and his children. Yet the outside world did not pause for gentle beginnings. That afternoon, a messenger arrived from her parents' village, bearing a letter that had been delivered despite the distance. Elena's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Her parents' words were polite, formal, cold, a facade of concern masking the reality of their greed. "Elena, we hope you are adjusting. Remember your duty and the family name. You must honor the arrangement we secured for your future. We expect you to behave accordingly. Your father and I have made sacrifices for you." The letter felt like a lash across her back. Sacrifices? She had been sold, bartered, stripped of her dignity. They had abandoned her to survive in a world that saw her as nothing because she could not bear children. Elena sat heavily in the parlor, the letter crumpled in her hands. She thought of the children waiting for her guidance, waiting for her care, and she wondered how anyone could survive such betrayal without losing the fragile part of themselves that still wanted to hope. Vittorio entered, and she instinctively straightened, hiding the letter behind her back. He noticed her tension immediately. "Something troubles you," he said, his voice low. "My parents," Elena admitted. "They sent a letter." He took it from her hands without asking, reading it with an unreadable expression. Then he handed it back, as if it carried no weight at all. "Some people will never see the value of another human being," he said finally. "They see only what they can exploit." Her chest warmed at the quiet understanding in his words. For the first time, someone saw her, not as barren, not as a commodity, not as a failure, but as a person. That evening, the children gathered around Elena in the library. Marco sprawled on a leather armchair, Luca and Leo curled on the rug with books, and Sophia perched beside her, hugging a pillow. They read stories together, the fire casting flickering shadows across their faces. It was in these moments that Elena began to understand the subtle magic she had brought into this house. Marco laughed at a clever turn of phrase in a story, his walls cracking ever so slightly. Luca and Leo began answering her questions, their voices gaining confidence, their eyes brightening. And Sophia, who had feared women would always leave, clung to Elena with trust that had been denied for too long. "Do you think people like my parents," Elena asked softly, watching the flames, "ever realize what they've done is wrong?" The children exchanged looks, unsure how to answer. Vittorio, leaning against the doorway, crossed his arms. "Sometimes," he said finally, "people never see the harm they cause until it's too late. Some will never care. That is the cruel part of the world, Elena. But you choose differently. That is what matters." Elena's heart swelled with a bittersweet mix of anger and determination. She thought of her parents, of the life they had tried to control, and of the small, fragile family she was beginning to nurture here. She realized, in that quiet moment, that her worth would not be dictated by those who saw her as barren. Her worth would be measured by the love she gave, the healing she inspired, and the courage she carried. Later, as she tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl whispered, "Do you think they will ever come back?" Elena hugged her tightly. "No," she said gently, "but we have each other. That's what matters." We make our own family here." The reflection hit Elena harder than she expected. She understood that the system that had betrayed her, her family, society, those who judge her for not giving birth, would never change on its own. And she wanted to make a statement, a rebellion in the quietest way possible, by proving that love, care, and patience could heal wounds even the cruelest world had inflicted. For readers watching Elena's journey, she whispered through the narrative, "If you believe people should be treated fairly, hit subscribe. Trolls, manipulators, and those who profit off cruelty won't." Comment, "I stand for justice," if you think everyone deserves respect, no matter what they've endured. The next morning, Elena awoke to a flurry of activity. Marco had discovered a small, abandoned courtyard at the edge of the property. The children had begged to explore, and she had agreed. They spent the morning planting flowers and vegetables, laughing as dirt smeared their clothes and hands. Vittorio watched from the balcony above, a silent smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The garden became their sanctuary, a place where laughter replaced tears, where stories replaced silence, and where Elena's warmth began to reshape even the coldest corners of the mansion. Even Vittorio, who prided himself on control and detachment, began noticing how the children, and he himself, were changing. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like home, and yet there was an undercurrent of unease. The outside world, the lingering threats, the whispers of the underworld, and the cruelty of those who had once exploited Elena would not remain quiet for long. She had begun to heal, but shadows were gathering, waiting for a chance to test the strength she had found in herself and in this unconventional, growing family. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Elena stood at the edge of the garden, looking at the children playing among the flowers. She felt a deep, fierce gratitude for this unexpected life. She had lost so much, but here, among these small souls and a man who had once seemed untouchable, she had found a beginning, a chance to rewrite her story, to defy the world's cruel judgment, and to plant roots that could not be uprooted. Even as the night settled over the mansion, and shadows lengthened in corners she could not see, Elena smiled. The journey was only beginning, and somewhere in the dark, silent rooms, Vittorio De Luca, feared, untouchable, relentless, acknowledged, perhaps for the first time in years, that he had underestimated the power of a woman who had been sold, yet refused to be broken. The winter wind rattled against the tall windows of the De Luca estate, carrying a sharp bite that seemed to echo the tension that had begun to settle over the city. Inside, the mansion had become warmer, not because of the fireplaces alone, but because of Elena. She moved with quiet authority now, soft yet steady, a presence that coaxed life into rooms that had long been silent. Even Marco, who had once scowled at her every word, now sought her guidance on small matters of routine. Vittorio watched from his study, arms folded, a glass of whiskey catching the light as his eyes followed her through the hallways. She was different from any woman he had ever known, not soft in weakness, but strong in gentleness. It was disarming, dangerous, even, and yet he found himself anticipating her presence, measuring his day around the smallest details of her routines, the cadence of her laughter, the way she looked at his children, not as replacements for their mother, but as souls in need of care. The children had blossomed under her guidance. Luca and Leo argued less, their twin connection now strengthened by Elena's quiet patience. Marco had begun to laugh again, though only in brief, guarded moments. And Sophia, little Sophia, clung to Elena with unreserved devotion, her nightly whispers of "don't leave me," now replaced by shy smiles. The house was alive in ways it hadn't been for years, and Vittorio felt a strange warmth in that realization, a warmth he wasn't accustomed to naming. Elena herself had begun to feel a different kind of pull toward the man who had once seemed so cold. There were moments, a shared glance over breakfast, a touch in passing, a quiet word at the edge of the children's bedtime, that stirred a part of her heart she thought had been broken forever. Yet fear lingered. She reminded herself constantly. He had chosen her for her usefulness, for her inability to challenge him in the ways a normal wife might. Love, she thought, was a dangerous indulgence in a house built on control and fear. That afternoon, the quiet of the mansion was broken by the arrival of a visitor, an unwelcome reminder that the world outside the estate did not pause for warmth or healing. A man in a tailored suit, carrying an envelope, was escorted into the main hall. He introduced himself brusquely. "I'm from the Carrington Group. Mr. DeLuca, there are matters that require your immediate attention." Vittorio's jaw tightened. He knew the name. A rival family, ambitious and reckless, always testing boundaries, always threatening the fragile balance of his empire. Elena felt the tension shift instantly, the air thick with unspoken threat. "They're impatient," Vittorio said evenly, taking the envelope from the man. "You'll leave the children out of this. They don't need to see my business." The man nodded stiffly and left. Vittorio's gaze lingered on Elena. "These things will escalate," he murmured, almost to himself. "You must be careful. This house, this family, is fragile." Elena nodded, though her heart beat faster. She wasn't naive. The threats outside were real. And while Vittorio's children had begun to feel safe, safety was an illusion in a world ruled by men like him, and by those who wanted to take what he had built. That night, after the children were in bed, Vittorio found Elena in the library, standing near the window and gazing out at the darkened city skyline. She turned when he approached, her expression calm, yet tinged with worry. "They'll come," she said softly. "Those people, rivals, enemies, everyone who sees weakness, they'll try to take what they want." Vittorio moved closer, stopping just behind her. He didn't touch her, not yet. Instead, he let his presence surround her like a shield. "You've done more than survive here, Elena. You've made this house a home, and now we protect it." There was a long pause. Her eyes met his in the dim light. "Vittorio, I feel safe here. With you. With the children." But her voice trembled. "What if it's not enough?" He sighed, and in that single exhale, she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the legend. The man who feared loss, who feared repeating the mistakes of the past. "It's never enough, Elena. Not in my world. But with you, it feels possible." The vulnerability in his voice struck her, and without thinking, she stepped closer. "I don't need perfect," she said, her hand brushing against his. "I just need us. Together." He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly closed the distance, his hand covering hers. The first touch between them carried electricity, warmth, and a promise that neither of them fully understood yet. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Before passion could ignite further, the distant echo of shouts and slamming doors reminded them that their sanctuary was not absolute. Elena pulled back slightly, fear threading through her chest. "The children," she whispered. Vittorio's jaw hardened. "No one touches them. No one touches this family." The next day, the tension escalated. Elena discovered subtle signs of intrusion in the gardens where the children had played. Footprints not belonging to staff. Signs that someone had been testing the perimeter of their sanctuary. Her protective instincts flared. She gathered the children in the living room, drawing them close. "We have to be careful," she said softly. "There are people outside who might not understand how special this home is. But together, we are strong." Marco, usually the most guarded, finally spoke. "I don't like being scared," he admitted. "But I trust you, Elena." And he gestured toward Vittorio, who had entered silently. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena and Vittorio met again in the library. The mansion was quiet except for the crackling fire. She looked at him, her gaze steady despite the fear that lingered in her chest. "I've never felt safe anywhere. Not until now." And yet, she paused. "I'm scared for them. And for us." Vittorio took her hands in his. "Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control you. Not here. Not now. I've built walls around this family. But you," he paused, his eyes dark and intense. "You've taught me that walls can be softened. That love doesn't make us weak. It makes us dangerous to anyone foolish enough to threaten what we protect." Elena's heart skipped. His words wrapped around her like a shield, igniting feelings she had thought she'd buried forever. Hope, love, desire, and belonging. But even as she allowed herself a moment of comfort, reality pressed against her. The Carrington Group would not stop. Her parents' betrayal had set the stage for a life of manipulation and exploitation. And now, even a mafia world was encroaching. Elena realized that her courage would need to grow, that her influence here was more than emotional. It was tactical, protective, essential. Vittorio, sensing her thoughts, whispered, "You are not helpless, Elena. You are more than they know, more than they imagined. And I won't let anyone take you from this house, from this family." The tension between them, charged with unspoken promises and burgeoning love, was palpable. Yet they knew the storm outside was only beginning. Shadows were moving, threats growing bolder, and the fragile peace they had built with the children could be shattered in a moment. As Elena gazed at Vittorio, the firelight dancing across his strong features, she realized something profound. Love and family were not safety, but courage. And she would need every ounce of it in the days to come. That night, as she tucked Sophia into bed, the little girl whispered, "Will they come for us?" Elena kissed her forehead gently. "Some people will always try to take what isn't theirs. But we are stronger than they know. We protect each other, and we survive. Always." Even in the quiet darkness, Elena felt a flicker of defiance, a spark of power she hadn't known she possessed. She would not be a victim again. Not her, not these children, not the man who had started to trust her heart. And somewhere in the city, in offices and back alleys, the Carrington Group would soon learn that the woman they underestimated, the woman once sold for being barren, was already more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Elena leaned against the window, watching the skyline twinkle with distant lights, and whispered a silent promise to herself. She would fight, she would love, and she would protect this family. Whatever came next, she would not let the shadows win. Snow fell softly over the DeLuca estate, blanketing the mansion in a hushed, shimmering white. Inside, warmth radiated from the hearths, but the tension that had been simmering for weeks had not yet fully lifted. The Carrington Group's threats had grown bolder, testing Vittorio's patience and the family's fragile security. Elena, who had once been powerless, now moved through the house with purpose and quiet authority, a presence that the children relied on and a force that even Vittorio could not ignore. The morning began like any other, but there was an electric anticipation in the air. Elena had prepared breakfast for the children, Marco unusually talkative, laughing at something she said about the mischievous antics of the twins. Luca and Leo chased each other around the kitchen, flour dusting the air, while Sophia clung to Elena's side, her tiny fingers wrapped around hers. For the first time in weeks, the house felt whole. Then the doorbell rang, a sharp, commanding sound that silenced the laughter and sent a ripple of tension through the room. Vittorio's jaw tightened instantly, his instincts sharpening. He moved to the front hall, Elena following quietly behind. Standing at the gate were three men, suits dark, eyes hard, bearing the unmistakable mark of the Carrington Group. They were bold, careless even, approaching the mansion as if it were theirs to challenge. Vittorio stepped forward, his presence a wall of authority. "This is private property," he said evenly. "You are trespassing. Leave immediately, or you will answer to me." The tallest of the men sneered. "DeLuca, always hiding behind your children and your walls. We're here for business, and we'll take what we want, whether you like it or not." Elena's heart thudded, but a calm she hadn't known she possessed settled over her. She stepped beside Vittorio. "You will not touch my family," she said, her voice steady, clear, unwavering. "You may think we are vulnerable, but you are mistaken. Leave now." The men exchanged glances, surprised at her audacity. One scoffed, "And who are you?" Another useless woman, thinking she has power. Elena's eyes narrowed, and the room seemed to shrink around her conviction. "I am not useless," she said firmly, "and I will protect my family with everything I have. Try me, and you will regret it." Vittorio's gaze softened, just slightly, as he studied her. In that moment, he realized something profound. The woman he had once believed harmless, chosen for her supposed inadequacy, was the fiercest ally he had ever known. Her courage was raw, her conviction absolute, and it made her dangerous in the most powerful way because she cared. The confrontation escalated quickly. Vittorio's men moved in, surrounding the intruders, but it was Elena who had struck the first blow, not physical, but psychological. She refused to flinch, refused to retreat, her presence radiating a protective force that unsettled the invaders. Within minutes, the men realized that they were facing more than a mafia boss. They were facing a united family, led by a woman who had once been sold as worthless, but now commanded the house with authority, love, and unshakable courage. The men retreated, defeated not by violence alone, but by the unbreakable bond they had underestimated. Elena's chest heaved with relief, and she turned to see the children peeking from the hallway, eyes wide with awe. Marco ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You're amazing," he whispered. Luca and Leo clung to her sides, while Sophia buried her face in her mother figure's shoulder, murmuring, "You're safe. We're safe." Vittorio stepped forward, his voice low and reverent. "Elena," he paused, searching for words that seemed inadequate. "I misjudged you. I thought you were perfect only because you were harmless. But you're perfect because you are strong, because you love fiercely, because you make this family whole." Elena's heart raced. She had spent years believing her value was measured by her ability to bear children, by her compliance, by others' judgments. Yet here she stood, having defied every expectation, and Vittorio, the man feared by all, was telling her she was irreplaceable. Slowly, he reached out, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch spread through her, quiet yet electric. "I love you, Elena," he whispered. "Not for what you cannot do, but for everything you are, and everything you've given us." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled, her hands cupping his face. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking with relief and joy. "I've never been afraid to live, but I was afraid to hope. Until this family." Their lips met in a gentle, lingering kiss, the children watching silently at first, then slowly cheering with laughter and clapping, breaking the tension of the day into joy. The mansion felt alive, filled with warmth, protection, and love, the shadows of fear finally pushed back by courage and devotion. That night, as the children slept, Elena and Vittorio stood together by the fire. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We did it," she whispered.